It's brilliant to have you all with us. Let's get started officially this morning. And as we start together on this, our Talking Toddlers webinar, hopefully you can see me on your screen. Are we there? I'm going to launch in and introduce myself. Hello and welcome to this, our Talking Toddlers webinar. Whether you are with us for the very first time, you are hugely welcome. Whether you've been with us on this Talking Toddlers journey over the last now 6 years, again, it's so good to have you with us, and we're so grateful not only for the opportunity in this space to be together, to look at, as we do across all of our Talking Toddlers webinars, look at different aspects of how we lead, how we serve the wonderful families, the children under the age of 5 in my context, your context, all across the UK and indeed further afield. To be looking at how together we can really cheer on and champion, resource, equip, serve, pray for, and hopefully more than anything, really encourage each other. I don't know about you, but don't we all need some encouragement? I'm sure for you in your leadership, whether you've been involved in a toddler group for 6 months, 2 years, 22 years, or like a woman called Mary, who I met within the last 6 months, who had led her toddler group valiantly for 42 years. I mean, my goodness, Mary needs a medal, doesn't she? But we just really hope that through this Talking Toddlers network and all that we're about, that we would really serve you and equip you and encourage you more than anything. Lydia, Lara, who are my wonderful team at the Evangelical Alliance, could you stop sharing the screen for me at the moment? So hopefully people can see me. There we go. Brilliant. Good morning, all. And to those watching on record as well, really glad to have you with us. We hope it serves you today. I don't know about you, but is it a bit of a shock that we are now in June? This year seems to be going incredibly quickly, doesn't it? Dare I say it will soon be Christmas. I'll take that back straight away. We've got lots to do before then, haven't we? Both in our churches and our ministries and through the toddler group context. And this morning, as you know, or again, whatever time of day it is for those watching on record, we're going to be looking at this title of Exploring the Impact of Faith Across the Generations. I don't know about you, but as you've joined us today and entering your details into the chat, we've posed that question: who had that direct maybe influential spiritual impact in your life? And in the preparation for this webinar, I was asking myself that very question, and actually couldn't come up with just one or two people, but it really made me feel a whole lot of gratitude to think that actually, whether it was my own parents, my own children's leaders in a church that I grew up in central Leicestershire, I live down in Ely in Cambridgeshire now, but actually there were children's workers, there were youth workers, there were my own parents, my own grandparents who poured into my life from a young age, as I'm sure many of us have similar stories, others will be entirely different. But today we want to look at exactly that theme of how we can see that impact of faith sharing across the generations. Before we go any further, let me introduce myself. My name is Rachel Heffer. I serve at the Evangelical Alliance as head of mission. And normally I would be joined by my wonderful colleague, who many of you will know, Dr. Rachel Jordan-Wolfe from Hope Together. We lead these partnerships or these webinars in partnership between the EA and Hope Together. But please do pray for Rachel, who's had to have some surgery recently and is recovering at the moment. She would love to be here with us, but unfortunately can't be today. So do pray for her. Just a little bit of housekeeping as we get started. You may see that we are recording this session so that those who may have their toddler groups this morning or can't be with us for whatever reason can download the recording. If you'd rather not have your picture on the screen, please do feel free to turn your picture off. We won't be recording the breakout rooms, of which we hope to have a couple of today, because we know that the best resource in the room, apart from our wonderful speakers who you'll hear about in a moment, is you. There has been nothing like this webinar over the last 6 years. I can honestly say, having, like many of us, having led hundreds of webinars since the pandemic and during COVID, I have to say the Talking Toddlers webinars always seem to be the most creative, interactive, resourcing webinars. And that's thanks to all of you who interact with each other, with us and in the chat. So please do that with us again today. As we get started looking at where we're at this point in the year, I wonder whether, as we go into breakout rooms in just a few moments' time, I wonder whether you've started to not only think about actually your teams looking ahead to the summertime, looking ahead to the makeup of what is now and what will be even into the autumn. I wonder actually, as we look and grapple with this theme of the impact of faith sharing across the generations, whether you see those good news stories of how we see the beauty of that intergenerational impact, don't we, from younger to older and everything in between. At this time of year, I'm guessing as well, for many of us, we'll be looking ahead to the end of term. Maybe some of you planning as well what it will look like to maybe lose some of your older little ones who go off and transition into school. And I'm sure many of you have great ideas of what you've used and tried out many years maybe before as to how to do that end of term, graduation or otherwise, to see and wish well the families who are moving on. It may be that you're juggling other challenges and so on. We'll have a minute to discuss some of those as we get acquainted in just a moment. But today we really hope that from hearing from our speakers, and that you will, as always in this context, feel again that actually what you glean from our speakers, what you glean from each other will do, as we said earlier, I hope it will resource you and equip you and really encourage you in this season. I'd love to share with you in just a moment some of our Talking Toddler research, just a few snippets to refresh our memories, whether you've heard it before or this is the first time, just to encourage us as to the absolute importance of the work that we do. In my role as head of mission at the EA, I speak to church leaders all over the country, and I love to point out some of these Talking Toddler statistics that heighten the fact, I believe, that there is actually no bigger and no better mission field than toddler groups, genuinely. And you'll see from some of the statistics in a moment. Let me just share with you part of the journey as we share screen to look at some of those. We started the Talking Toddler research back in 2020, crazily, just as we went into lockdown and all of our toddler groups stopped. And yet the amazing wealth of now just under 700 toddler group leaders in our Talking Toddlers network. What we saw during the pandemic was just how relational, how effective, how caring, how compassionate leaders like yourselves and others were in reaching into the lives of families who were juggling very young children, or maybe those who weren't yet born actually, but often had those who had other young children during that time of the pandemic. You'll remember it well, as I do. But let me share with you not what came from our 2020 Talking Toddlers research, but just a few statistics that came out of our more recent research as we redid it again in 2025. And some of you might have joined us back in June last year as we spoke to some of the new research. On the next slide, you'll see one of the big headline stats that came out, which was this. We found, on the next slide, you can see it hopefully coming on your screen, we found that 80% of all families, not just church families, but all families across the UK with children under the age of 5, attend a church-based activity, predominantly a toddler group. Hopefully that slide will come up on your screen in just a moment. But let me just reiterate that as we maybe hear that again. 80% of all families with children under the age of 5 attending a church-based activity. Isn't that phenomenal? I find that hugely challenging, encouraging, and actually quite mind-blowing. Often when I speak to church leaders, some of you might be with us today, but you see that dawning realization of the wealth of opportunity that we have to reach into our wider communities with 80% connecting. I myself am a mum of now older teenage boys, but I remember, like I'm sure so many of us, what an absolute lifeline toddler groups were, taking my young ones along for so many different reasons, much of which again is resonated through the research, and do find it online if that's helpful. But on the next slide, you'll see that what came out through some of those reasons that people wanted, whether they wanted that new life, whether it was the parent, the grandparent, the childminder, the godparent, whoever was coming along, what they wanted was they wanted their child to have good values. They wanted them to know, well, they knew that they were going to be warmly welcomed, that they were going to have a good time. They came along because they wanted them, as people told us, they wanted them to know about God. They wanted them to know Bible stories. That came out quite clearly through the research. And what we found, as you can see on the screen here in front of you, is that where amidst our groups, like the one in my own church here in Ely, but where there was a Christian distinctiveness through maybe Bible action songs or Bible stories interspersed with other great songs or stories, as many of us will use, 57% of people said where there was a Christian distinctiveness, they reported back to us that their own faith had been challenged and changed as a result. I don't know about you, but again, on hearing that, I found that deeply challenging, but also super encouraging of the fact that, of course, so much of what we do in our toddler group context is fueling, isn't it, and pouring into those young lives, our 2, 3, 4-year-olds and so on that are with us. But actually, we know we've got the eyes and ears, haven't we, of the adults that are with us in that space as well. So I hope you, like me, are encouraged by that. We also heard this next statistic, that 53% of people who told us that when they were asked about how they viewed the toddler group that they were part of, all so often in a church building, that their children and they recognised that church as their church. There was a sense of affiliation, a safe place, that actually they did see that as a place that they could belong. And I'm sure you see that resonated again through many of the families that you serve and do life with on a week-to-week basis. And just lastly, from our 2025 research, again, there's lots more beside, but we also learned that 47% of people who were not yet part, who were kind of, we called them fringe parents, or those not yet reached, we learned that 47% of parents with young children who currently don't attend our toddler groups or church activity said that they would actually love to have an invite. And we were really interested to hear that the way that they'd like to most be invited was actually not necessarily online or on social media, although that was really important, but they wanted a paper invite put in their hands. That interested us, again, in an age of overwhelm, maybe for parents or grandparents, whoever is bringing our children along, that actually they wanted often a paper leaflet, but they did really want to be invited. Those are some of the stats from our recent research, but let me just take you to a couple of others in a previous piece of research some of you might have heard of or been a part of over the years, called Talking Jesus. And the Talking Jesus research, right back to 2015, more recently published in 2022, and we're literally in the process of remapping for 2027. But this told us about the state of faith across the UK. And it reminded us, as you'll see on this next slide, that when we asked people about, actually for not just the non-Christians that we surveyed, but the practicing Christians, when we asked them how they had come to faith and about their journey, we found that 34% of people said that actually they'd come to faith because of growing up in a Christian family. Other stats you can see there around, actually it was reading the Bible, but also it was attending Sunday school or responding and going along to Christian events, church schools and otherwise. The next slide just reminds us, just lastly, before we pause here, the importance of actually pouring into the young. My background is in youth ministry, and as I said, having had young children as well, know the importance of pouring into our young people, our children, and indeed as young as our toddlers. And as you can see here, the Talking Jesus research told us that whilst there's a conversation there, 33% of people said that they believe they'd actually come to the Christian faith by birth. Again, we talk about what people making a decision, discipleship and so on. But we also see, if you look at those under 18, the vast majority of people come to faith at a very young age, and 5% recollected that actually their journey with the Lord started even from the age of being 4 or under. And certainly I know of Rachel Jordan Wolfe. She would say that she became a Christian quite simply at the age of 3 or 4 herself. For me, I was age 7. For many of us, we'll have different stories, won't we? But again, just a reminder as we get started of the importance of pouring into our young. As we know, that's what we do. That's why we're here. And the Talking Toddlers research, I hope, just goes to encourage us of the reach, the impact and the mission landscape that we're a part of. So hopefully that helps just frame a little bit as to, again, this importance of doing what we do week in, week out, serving, equipping and working with our families. As we move on, I'm going to give us the opportunity to go into breakout rooms in just a moment's time, but I'd love to share with you just who we've got with us this morning. In a few moments' time, the other side of the breakout rooms, we're going to be hearing from 2 brilliant speakers that we're delighted to welcome with us this morning. First of all, we're delighted to have Dr. Sarah Holmes with us, who's the lead researcher for Scripture Union. Sarah, oh, there's Sarah, popped up on your screen to say a quick hello. Morning, Sarah. Hi, great to have you with us. We'll be hearing from Sarah in just a moment. Sarah wears many hats, has been author and researcher across the board. We'll hear more from her in just a moment. But we also have with us Becky Cedric from Parenting for Faith. And Hi there, Becky. Good to see you. Can give us a wave. And in just a few moments, we're going to be hearing from both Sarah and Becky, the wealth of resources and experience that they carry, but also their passion for looking at this exact topic, the impact of faith sharing across generations. So you'll hear more from Sarah and Becky in just a few moments. But what we'd love to invite you to do now is to go into a breakout room for just 5 minutes or so, and love you to just say who you are, where you are, get acquainted with the few people that are in your breakout room. And if you would, I'd love you to just, before we launch into our core topic for today, thinking about this season, this time of year, what one or two great or tested ideas might you have for looking towards the end of term and rolling into the summer? Whether you pause over the summer, whether you've got summer activities, do share with each other what good ideas, or whether you're looking for ideas for the summer and that end of term. And if one of you would be very kind, or a few of you, to put some bullet points in the chat to share those ideas with others, that is always a great resource for those looking in the chat too. So we're going to go into breakout rooms, enjoy getting acquainted, and we will come back together in just a few moments. Well, welcome back. As you're coming back in, I hope that you've had a great time being able to engage with each other and getting a little acquainted in your breakout rooms. Certainly from what I've heard, there's some great ideas. We'd love you to just take a moment. Would you, maybe a few of you, or certainly somebody from your group, would love to just put a line or two in the chat. We'd love to have those ideas that always go to fuel other people in terms of their ideas. So if you've got some good ideas that you spoke of for the end of term, please do put them in the chat now as we go on from here. Some of the ideas that I heard were about holding a summer celebration party, seeing those who've journeyed with you for some long while, families and little ones, but a summer themed party, and that sort of graduation style, wishing well those who are going on to school picnics. Again, both at the end of term or into the summertime. We've heard of people who've used bubbles and water features, chalks and games and so on at the end of term. Personalised certificates for those, again, who we might want to say, well done for being with us during this year, particularly those going on to school. Displaying artwork, talking about how much people have grown and changed over the year, and so on. There are loads of ideas. And coming up in the chat, again, we can see ideas of picnic, farm visits, teddy bears picnic, always goes down well, doesn't it? A sports day themed graduation, bubble blessings, like the sound of that one, that sounds great. Bible graduation gifts, yeah, for all that we're seeing and hearing across the UK about people's openness to the Bible. The Bible sales, as we know, in the national big picture, rocketing, aren't they? Over like huge, I think it was 87% increase in Bible sales over the last 5 years. So absolutely. How about getting a little gospel or a children's Bible into people's hands if you're able? Toddler Bible, someone suggested there. Yeah, meeting at the farm for picnic. Please do keep those ideas coming. That's amazing. And we love to hear from you. Great. Well, you'll have time later back in breakout rooms to digest what we've heard, but we're going to take a bit of time now with our wonderful Sarah and Becky, who are introduced to a bit earlier. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about them before we hand over. So let's welcome Sarah and Becky back to the screen. So we have with us Dr. Sarah Holmes. Again, Sarah, welcome to you. And Sarah is Scripture Union's lead researcher and passionate about equipping churches to inspire children and families through innovative and research-informed ministry. Research is so helpful, isn't it? It just paints a picture of the missional landscape that we're a part of. Sarah has over 20 years of experience focusing on children's faith and family faith journeys, and particularly looking into early years and neurodiversity as well. She had a degree in geography from Liverpool University. And I read here, Sarah, tell me if this is true, that originally you wanted to be a weather girl or an earthquake predictor. That sounds very exciting.
Yeah, and then I ended up here. So
where better to be? But those are very interesting vocations that you chose at a young age. Hilarious, isn't it, that God has quite different plans for us sometimes?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Great to have you with us. Let me introduce Becky as well, who you can see on your screen. Becky Sedgwick is works for Parenting for Faith as their resources lead. Great to have you with us, Becky. Before this role, she was working as children and families worker for 9 years, where she ran Parenting for Faith courses. And I know both Sarah and Becky have developed courses as well for that you'll hear more about. Becky's also written a book called Grandparenting for Faith, exploring how grandparents can really actively encourage and equip their grandchildren to meet and know God. And I'm sure Becky won't mind me saying right from the outset, it's not always about the bloodline relatives, is it? But the power of impacting across generations, both absolute bloodline grandparents, but well outside of that, and what the beauty the church has to lean into that. So welcome, Becky. Tell us where you are in the world today.
I live in Devizes in Wiltshire, so that's and it's incredibly rainy right now.
Is it? Oh dear. Yeah, well, I'm in cloudy Cambridgeshire, but I don't know what it's like where you are, Sarah. But bless
Same.
you. Same all over. Thank you for being with us. Let me hand straight over to you and do lead us from here. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit for about 10 minutes or so, and then about this sort of topic of the impact of faith sharing across generations. And then Becky's going to join me and we'll talk about kind of more sort of practical things and so on as well. So I wonder why, this was my question. It's interesting. Rachel was asking us who has impacted our faith, but I wonder why we would want to share faith across generations. And the passage that I always kind of am drawn to is this in Psalm 78, verse 4, this idea of passing on our faith to the next generation. And I always say in the church, we just are absolutely brilliantly set up to be able to do this, to be able to pass on faith down the generations. And that's just brilliant. And one of the things that interests me, Rachel mentioned that I am involved in early childhood, particularly teaching that at Liverpool Hope. And this idea of attachment. Now, you may or may not have come across this, but it's this idea that young children, right from literally the first minutes of their life, are developing attachments with the people who are there closest to their close relationships around them. And it's through those close attachments and bonds that they are working out who they should be and how they should be, how they should interact with the world. And I would say also how they can have faith in God, how they can get to know God, how they can connect with God. And so I think it's brilliant that in toddler groups, we can support parents and carers in building these healthy attachments. But I also would encourage us to say, how can we support parents and carers in passing their faith on to their child? Maybe they themselves do not particularly have a strong faith themselves yet, but often we find that parents and carers are keen to help their child to explore what faith is or have some kind of sense of morals or that kind of thing, even from an early age. And so this idea from Deuteronomy 6, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, this idea of faith sharing happening just as part of everyday life, that idea of wherever we're walking around, sitting down, lying down, eating, moving around, that God's commands, God's truths, we'll be kind of sharing them and talking about them as part of daily life. And so I've put up here some theorists that I talk about and teach about a lot in terms of early childhood. Doesn't matter really who they are or kind of what they've got here, but I wanted to kind of share with you, there is just an overwhelming body of research, theory, and all these kind of ideas just going to show that young children are social beings. They learn so much from those social interactions and all those kind of things that are going on around them. And one of the theorists that I love the most, and my students laugh at me because I go on about this so much, is Bronfenbrenner here. And Bronfenbrenner here talks about the child in the centre and all of the different influences upon a child. And so we see in the first circle, that orangey sort of one, the microsystem, the family, those close contacts. Maybe it might include the childminder, the nursery, and then sort of looking a bit more widely, the extended family, and then wider society beyond that. But I would firmly say that toddler groups are very much part of this sphere of influence on children and on families. And that sense of how your toddler group can, yes, support the family to support the child, but also how you can support them in passing faith onto their child. And I was just from this morning, 8 o'clock this morning, I've been also joining a conference via Zoom in Rome, run by World Vision, and I was listening to a talk which was fascinating, all about how they've done so much research, and the thing that is the biggest determinant, if you like, the biggest driver of hope and flourishing in children is human connectivity and relationships. And to me, that's kind of what toddler groups are doing. They're fostering that sense of connectivity and relationships. And so I would say, how can toddler groups model this? How can we be modeling faith sharing across generations? And I think what they were saying at this talk this morning is so true. How people experience dignity in our settings, how the way they're spoken to, the way they're listened to, the way our relationships help them to grow personally, but also in their faith, is so key. At Scripture Union, where I do research work now, we talk about revealing Jesus to children and families. And I love that concept because it's quite invitational. There's no sense of imposing about that. You know, I'm going to today instruct you all about Jesus and you've got to turn from your sins right now. But that sense of we're revealing that and we're inviting people to explore that. And so think for yourselves, perhaps in your own toddler group setting, how can you be sort of having that culture, that ethos of revealing Jesus, of supporting people in your setting, the adults there, to pass faith on to the younger generation. And one of the things that I have been particularly passionate and interested about in the pandemic, I did some research into Christian grandparents. Now, I'm very aware that many of our toddler groups have Christian grandparents or grandparents, perhaps who are not Christians as well, but have grandparents coming along. And so this is why I thought I'd just take a couple of minutes to share with you some of the research that I did. Actually, I'll just skip to the next slide first. I spoke to Christian grandparents and they talked about so many different experiences. Some did feel involved in terms of the faith sharing with their grandchildren, but many felt like background involvement. Many felt they didn't know if they could or couldn't say about faith to their grandchild. They didn't quite know what the boundaries were, what they were allowed to do or not allowed to do. Some talked about feeling excluded or uninvolved in terms of faith and their grandchildren. And that included families where all of the different generations were Christians and actively involved in church. Many just didn't know if they were allowed to. Many felt they lacked confidence about that. And yet also some were involved. And I think that's really important for us to kind of know and be aware of as we're ministering with grandparents in the toddler group settings, that many are lacking confidence. And that was something that I just hadn't quite appreciated and grasped the level of that. And so how can we, and we'll talk in a few moments with Becky about how you as toddler groups could work to build that confidence. But one of the things was that as I looked at denomination websites, church websites, media, Christian media, magazines, websites, that kind of thing, there was very little mention about grandparents. We talk increasingly, which is great, about parents and carers and the role they have in passing faith on to children, but not much about grandparents or grandparents figures who may not be, as Rachel already said, that kind of bloodline as such, but people who are coming around a child to support them. And I wonder if even just starting to drip feed and mention some of these things about grandparents having a role would actually start to equip and build confidence. One of the things here I'm just showing is the obstacles that grandparents talked about, and also churches talked about this idea that safeguarding sometimes puts people off in church, that sense of older generations having conversations with younger generations in church, perhaps in toddler groups, that sense of, I don't know if I'm allowed to, don't know if this is breaking safeguarding. And the second point there, I think there are a generation who feel they're not permitted or allowed to. And there's also often a lot of fear about causing offence to others. And so again, thinking in your toddler group, how could you start to just sort of drip feed that sense of it's okay to have conversations? Perhaps here are the ways that we want to keep everybody safe. These are our safeguarding guidelines and principles. Of course, that is hugely important, but that shouldn't stop conversations between different generations happening, and particularly about faith. So also, many were talking about lacking confidence in informal scenarios. Perhaps if they were asked explicitly, these grandparents were often willing to talk about faith, but didn't necessarily want to instigate that themselves. And so when we think about the visitors in our toddler groups as grandparents or different generations, that's great. But also, I'm so aware that volunteers or people running the toddler groups are of many different ages. And again, that is just a huge wealth of people who our children and families are coming into. So these are kind of questions for you to ponder for now, really. What unique gifts and strengths are these older generations bringing to your toddler groups? And are you affirming that? Are you making them feel that those gifts and strengths are valued? Or do they perhaps feel like, oh, they're putting up with me because I'm old? But how can you, which I don't think is true, but sometimes just by not mentioning it, that's perhaps the feeling that comes across. So how can you show these different generations, these different ages, that you value what they're bringing and you value their faith story and want that sort of talked about as part of that sort of culture? But also I've popped a little thing at the bottom there, that culture of everybody learning together. And if we can sort of foster that all of us as different generations are walking alongside and learning together, I think that's really, really great. Now, I'm just in a moment, we're just going to share a video with you because I know that toddler groups do amazing work and are so busy doing so many things. And often it can feel like, how on earth can I start to encourage grandparents as part of what I'm doing? And so we've worked, Becky, as Rachel already said, wrote a book about grandparenting for faith. And so we've worked together to develop a course. So we're just going to show a video in a second to you, a little short promo video to give you a bit of a flavour about the grandparenting for faith course and perhaps how you could use it in your church, in your toddler group setting. So let's watch this short video together. Hello and welcome to the Grandparenting for Faith course. We are so delighted that you're joining us as we explore together how you can share God with the children and young people that you love the most.
Now, the course is full of information about God's idea of what a grandparent's for, but also packed full of skills and tools and approaches that will help you grandparent for faith in whatever situation you find yourself in.
And we're going to be joined by various contributors, people who've been involved in ministry with children and young people, and will share their insights with you. We have actual grandparents contributing to this course, and we've got various experts who've done a lot of thinking about this area and want to help you in exploring this together.
We've been looking at the Grandparenting for Faith course today and really impressed by how useful that's going to be for our church and for small groups as well. We are grandparents ourselves and we look forward to making great use of it in the future.
Pulls it all together. Yeah, very helpful in fact, yes.
Today it's very important that we recognise the importance of grandparents, why they have lots of things in common with their grandchildren, and they have a unique relationship where they can just bless that child, model good behaviour in an understanding and in a context that nobody else gets. So it's a wonderful opportunity for the parents, grandparents and the church to unleash the secret weapon, the superpower of grandparenting.
The course is for everyone who is a grandparent or a grandparent figure, so aunties, uncles, godparents, family friends, people who work with children and young people in church, anyone who has a child or a young person in their life whom they'd love to meet and know God.
Thanks for sharing that. Sorry, it was a bit glitchy. We'll share the link with you as well. And in a moment, I'll pop in the chat where you can see the course. But Becky, would you tell us a bit more about the course and how perhaps toddler groups or churches could use it in their setting?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me for that. Fabulous. I've been scribbling down facts and figures all over the place. Because you just want to underpin what everybody else has said. This opportunity toddler groups have is extraordinary when you look at the statistics. So grandparenting and grandparenting for faith is something that has been very much on the heart of Parenting Faith, the organisation I work for, which the reason Parenting Faith exists is to resource families. And I was really interested in that statistic Rachel shared earlier. I think it was 34% of people say the reason I'm a Christian is because of my family. And, which means actually as churches we have a big responsibility to equip the families of those who come. And so what we see in toddler groups so often is parents think they're coming for their child, but then they begin to explore faith. So how can we be really intentional in that journey is the DNA of Parenting for Faith. It's what we explore. And part of this is this research into grandparents and grandparent figures. And because God created a church that was multi-generational for a reason. And part of that reason is that we have a lot to learn from those who are a little bit older and wiser than us. I tell the story in the book Grandparenting for Faith about I decided when I was a children's worker to run a toddler group, a Bible study for mums. And I had it all down pat. They were going to drop off the older kids, come with their babies and toddlers, have really posh coffee and croissant. It was going to be the real deal. And of course, after about 3 weeks, a scary 90-year-old called Jenny said, I want to come to your group. And I was powerless to resist her, actually, because she was that sort of lady. But it ended up, the long and the short of it, I ended up with this group being this mix of grandmothers and older ladies on sort of one side of the room, and they would be cuddling the babies. And these mums who are just beginning kind of their journey of parenthood. And I realized after 3 weeks that I was redundant, because actually the discipling was coming from the grandparents, the grandmothers, because anything one of those young mums have been through, they've been through in spades. And they've been through it with God. And they were telling stories of what happened when people died, when their husbands died, or when they fostered children, or when their teenagers had tantrums. Yes, they knew all about it. And it just hit me at that point was that this was this incredible resource that normally was quite silent. And so how can we draw out that wisdom? So that's kind of the birth of grandparenting for faith, and the fact that at Parenting for Faith, we would get a lot of people saying, I understand what you're teaching us for parents, but it's a bit different when I'm a grandparent. And so we end up thinking, what's it like to be a grandparent of faith? But of course, the extension of that is this idea of spiritual grandparents, or the grandparenting generation church. And I think, like me, you can probably think of older people in your church who just seem to be able to come alongside others and journey with
like
them.
That guy said, wasn't it? The superpower, unleash the superpower.
It is the superpower.
Yeah.
And and I'm really sad when I see older generation discounting themselves or saying, oh, it's for the younger generation, because actually no, God created this multi-generational church so we could look to the next generation to see what is life with God like. And alongside that, in the grandparenting research, one of the things that we discovered was that there's lots of science around the relationship between the older generation and the younger generation. And in family terms, that's often that people feel that their grandparents are non-judgmental, they've got time, they're this extra layer of support. But it works in church as well. You've probably all got experience of with a lady called Helen in her 70s would be in the youth group team, and she was hanging around, all the kids were going to talk to her. They would all talk to her, and she would be imparting wisdom and everything. So really that's the background to the Grandparenting for Faith book and course. And one of the things we explore in the course is not just what you can do, but why you can do it. And it's not just because you're going to try really hard to explain Jesus to people. It's saying, actually, you have influence that God has created, because God's design for families and designs for churches that it's multi-generational, and this older generation has a particular role in sharing faith. And so we say to grandparents, typically we run this with grandparents or talk to grandparents, and they don't feel they're very influential. They feel they're a bit out of date, maybe particularly in today's society. I do not go near TikTok. I cannot have these conversations, even along my team. Now I've reached a certain age, I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about anymore. But what we see is that what people actually want is that human contact and that reality. And I think in toddler groups, that can often be a lot of parents young parents are detached from a kind of traditional support system where they might have learnt about how to parent from their own parents or the auntie down the road or somebody. And you know, there are it's not uncommon, I think, to hear young mums say, I've never changed a nappy before this one. I've never, you know, so they've got to negotiate parenting without that network, and they look for networks, and toddler groups can be great places. And the great thing about a toddler group is typically they'll have a grandma in there or a grandfather figure or somebody, and it's kind of like this relationship which teaches them and supports and nurtures them and a kind listening ear. So we talk about this influence. We talk about the fact in the grandparenting context, we know it's not always very straightforward, but in a kind of spiritual grandparenting context, we're really not looking for tell people about Jesus. We're looking for this reveal Jesus thing. I really like that Sarah was talking about from Scripture Union, because we're saying, Bill, what you know about God, which is so brilliant, that he's been your companion through grieving, that he's given you wisdom when you needed it, that you feel real joy when you worship, whatever it is. This is lovely stuff that other people, if they understood it, would understand God. So we're not just saying to someone, believe in God. We're saying this is a God who is incredible and important and significant for me, and I'd like you to know about him. So we talk about that revealing, and in really simple ways. It's not, you know, the big kind of sermon, or it's not we can go to two extremes, really. We can try and preach to people, or we can try and just sneak it in through a Bible story or something. But actually, in our natural conversations, how can we talk about Jesus? You know, where you might be talking to someone and say, oh, I had a really scary hospital appointment last week. And actually what happened for you was that you knew that people were praying, and that made a difference. If you just add that into a conversation, say a mum who doesn't know Jesus says, oh, you know, are you feeling better? You can say, yeah, I had a really scary hospital appointment last week, but I'm okay now. Or do you say, I had a really scary hospital appointment, but I'm so grateful people were praying? It's kind of a throwaway comment, but the power of that comment is in that in somebody who doesn't know about prayer, it kind of opens a little window in their head that goes, oh, maybe prayer is important. And it's that kind of, so we talk about that. How do we call it creating windows. How do we create little windows into our relationship with God that helps other people understand the power and significance of it? And it doesn't require us to explain it. It just says, I call it the God bits. What are the God bits? You hear a siren across the road and you start praying. That stuff that you do with God, or God is doing with you, that other people don't see. And so you've got this situation where we can just start to reveal God in by helping them see who God is for us. Yeah. And I think that's something we can all do.
And someone's just asked in the chat there, would you offer to pray in the toddler group? And I think that's kind of partly depending, isn't it, on the situation, and it's back to that relationship thing. So if you're building these relationships and that feels kind of appropriate and not forced or awkward.
And it depends, every toddler group has its own culture, doesn't it? Its own. Are you a specifically Christian toddler group? Are you just a toddler group that meets in church? And I think one of the things which I've never known anyone say no to, when someone's sharing, because very quickly in toddler groups you'll get we're worried about our housing situation, or there's an illness, or there's something. In those normal natural conversations, you say, you can just say, would you like me to pray about that? And I don't think I've ever had anybody say no. And then the follow-up question, which is quite useful, is, would you like me to do that later, or would you like me to do that now? Because that's the invitation.
Yes.
And then do follow up. How was the meeting with Citizens Advice, or whatever it was? So, so you've got that ongoing thing. So this, prayer is such a straightforward way in that I think most of us feel comfortable doing.
Yeah. That's great. And so there's 2 courses available. One is for churches themselves. I think it's about an hour and a half long, so it's nothing too onerous. But the idea is, how can you as a church sort of start to embed some of, or a lot of what Becky is talking about there? What can you do to just change the culture slightly? What things can you be doing? And then the other course, do you want to tell us a bit about the actual structure and how churches could use that?
Yeah, it's a 6-session course, and it's really easy to use. I've, as a person who's used courses, I really like the ones where basically you turn the video on and cheer it on, and it's one of those. And it's online, it's on demand. It's just about to move to a new platform, but it'll be very similar. So you just kind of watch a little bit. There are suggestions for conversations and questions you can have around it. There's a little handbook you can download, but none of it's necessary. Most of it is just starting conversation and thinking. And what we always like to say it's not about understanding and embedding every bit of the course. It's about which bit jumps out for you at this stage in your journey. And we talk about that creating windows idea. We talk about framing. And I think framing, I don't run a toddler group currently. I haven't actually run one for quite a long time, but last summer I helped run a toddler church over the summer, and I was back in my happy place, I have to say. But I think there's an awful lot we can do about how we explain things. I think, in church, we're very good at saying we're going to read the Bible now, or we're going to sing some songs. But actually, what are we doing? And in toddler group, in our little, because it was advertised as Toddler Church, when it was time to read the story, I just introduced it by saying, oh, we've got our story time now, and this isn't any old story. This is one of God's stories. I wonder what God's got to say to us today. And when you frame, just put a bit of context around it, what I was doing was actually just pointing out this was a different story. It was a story of God, but also what does God have to say to us today? It's a story that speaks, and you're just beginning to put into the minds of the parents and carers listening that actually this isn't just another story, because toddler groups are full of other stories. This is a special story. The same with when we pray, you can say, we're just going to talk to God now. I wonder what God's going to say. You're beginning to shape how people understand the activity you're doing. So it's not just another song, another thing. The same with singing. We're going to sing some songs that tell God how much we love him. Just great. Beginning to shape and frame. And also when you're doing that, you're beginning to put into people's heads what they could be doing with their child at home. So it's the same in the grandparenting faith. We talk about framing. How do we explain what this God stuff is, what we're doing? Where is God and what's he doing? We're not just in a toddler group, we're worshipping God. How do you explain that well, that doesn't just sound very churchy, that makes sense? So we talk about framing. We talk specifically about how to share the Bible well with children and young people of all ages, but specifically, there's some stuff in there for toddler groups. How do we not just tell it well from a kind of engaging point of view, but how do we help them see who God is in a story? I like to talk about the story of baby Moses, because in the Bible there's no mention of who God is in that story. It could be a fairy story. There is a bad king, there is a amazing princess, there's a big sister, there's a rescue. It's a classic fairy story, but actually we can just add in the little bits about what God was doing in that as we tell them, to help the listener make the connection between who God was then and who he is now. So they just begin to build a picture of God.
It's brilliant. And we're going to have some time shortly in breakout groups, but just before we do that, so two things just to quickly mention. One is that so you as a church could either put this on. Some churches on say have grandparents bring your lunch, stay on afterwards, and sort of do it, or perhaps people are self-running it themselves.
You can do it. It's really tailored to be, particularly with Zoom and everything, it's incredibly easy to use. So you can gather people. You could watch a little bit of each session each week. You could do it as part of a life group. That might work really well. You can say to people, oh, well, watch this video in your own time, then we'll gather to meet it. It's really
the 6 sessions. You could do it in 6 1 hours, or each session could divide into, is it 3 or 4, something like that? So you could do it
chunks, and they really are easy to run. And I think the one for church leaders, I think specifically we said, we know that church leaders are really busy. We don't want to burden them and say, you've got to watch this video. So it's a little introduction to the idea, which they'd just be able to watch while they're eating their sandwiches, because it's really helpful, I think, to be able to share with your church leader what you're doing, so they understand it in the context of the whole church.
But also whole church, including grandparents and grandparent figures. We were so keen to do that.
And this power, absolutely. I'm a massive fan of the older generation working with children and young people. You see, there's a difference when you see it, the power of what that generation brings.
And actually, it's so easy, isn't it? It's nothing that people would disagree with. But I think people would want to be doing this more, but just little changes will make a big difference. And finally, just before we do go to breakout rooms, I'm going to pop in the chat. Becky and I are both involved in the first ever national conference for Christian grandparents in October. Becky, is it the 4th?
October the 3rd.
3rd, yes, the Saturday in Milton Keynes area. And we're so excited. So if you are a grandparent or know any grandparents want to come along to that, it will just be a time of sharing together, being inspired together, encouraging and equipping. So do look out for that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So shall we hand back to you, Rachel?
Brilliant. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Becky and Sarah. I hope that you all feel as inspired as I do. This subject is so close to my own heart with my own children, in that my parents live, who are obviously their grandparents, they live 4.5 hours away. And albeit that they're teenagers now, they invest, and have done for 6 years since the pandemic, they invest every week on FaceTime with my boys, 4.5 hours away, not just catching up on their week, but looking at the Bible together, sharing life, sharing stories. And I can't tell you how absolutely grateful I am for their input, their discipleship. And praise God, my eldest son is to be baptized in 3 weeks' time. And I really must say that I constantly thank my parents, because they have been the biggest disciplers as grandparents to them. So even at a distance, it's possible. So I'm hugely excited by this dialogue and just all that you've mapped in terms of the possibilities. Before we hear more from Sarah and Becky, 2 things. One, we're going to go into breakout rooms, as Sarah said, just to give you a chance to yourself and with others digest. What do you take from what you've heard? What's jumped out at you? What encourages you? What inspires you? And what challenges you about the context that you're in? Where could you take maybe even 1 or 2 golden nuggets of what you've heard will you take away from today? And secondly, please do put any questions in the chat, because when we come back together in just over 5-6 minutes or so, a short bit of time, we're going to have just a 3-way panel, myself with our wonderful speakers, to just go a little bit deeper. So I'd love to hear your questions if you've got questions yourself of Sarah or Becky. So let's go into those breakout rooms, enjoy chatting and consolidating what you've heard. Put any comments or thoughts in the chat, but also do put your questions, and we'll see you very soon. Well, welcome back. I hope that in your breakout rooms, albeit only a short bit of time, I hope that you had a chance to feed into each other just a few thoughts that popped out to you from the wealth of wisdom and the information from both Sarah and Becky, but also the insight into what some of these courses can help us in equipping those of older generations in our context to look at, again, just having that confidence of what grandparents and grandparent figures can bring to our different contexts. Please do, if you've got any thoughts that came out of your conversations, I would love it if you could put those thoughts in the chat, and indeed any questions. We've got a few minutes now to bring both Sarah and Becky back. So as they come and join me again, welcome back. Thank you so much for all that you shared, both Becky and Sarah. Really appreciate that, and appreciate the work that you do, not only the research but the courses, which just further go to equip us in our ministry in the toddler group context. I love the fact that we now have a grandparenting for faith conference as well. How exciting that is, as you said, that maybe not enough focus has been on actually the wealth of wisdom that grandparents bring in our culture and so on as well. So welcome back. I'm going to pose to you a few questions, if that's all right. There might be others who put questions in the chat. The first one that's there is, can you remind us when exactly the grandparents conference will be and where it's going to be? Oh, I think Sarah's already responded to that, so I can see it's going to be Milton Keynes. Sarah, is that right?
Yep, Milton Keynes. And as someone from the north, I was saying, can't it be more central? So we will hope in future, as it's, we're hoping it'll be an annual thing. But Milton Keynes, hopefully you can travel there quite easily in various ways. But yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. So Milton Keynes it was the 3rd of October, is that right?
Yeah.
So I know I've mentioned that to a few people already, and including a number of church leaders who already pricked their ears up thinking that sounds brilliant. And that they were going to rally their teams to come along. So
yeah, and it won't just be for grandparents, it will be for this spiritual grandparenting generation. There will be stuff there for them, because most grandparents in churches, you know, you've got two roles, because very few grandparents have all their grandchildren in church, but you do have relationships with and responsibilities within your church as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I vividly remember a number of years ago actually seeing a different piece of research quite a long time ago, but I think it was from Youth for Christ, and it asked young people as young as sort of age 8 or 9, so out of toddler group, but asked them this question: what's the single biggest voice that you most value and crave? And actually, having opened that up for people to guess, on a few occasions people said, well, maybe it was friends, maybe it was parents, maybe it was teachers, but you can guess what came out. It quite simply, resoundingly, across a couple of thousand older children who were asked, it was the role of grandparents and the voice of grandparents that was the most significant value. So it's important, isn't it? And thanks for all the work.
I remember, and I can't find it now, but I remember reading that there was a group of young people who asked, what sort of person would you like to lead your youth group? And they were thinking it was going to be a trendy sort of 20-year-old, and actually they wanted a grandparent figure, somebody of that generation.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, yeah, for loads of good reasons, and I think they're completely right.
Yeah. Well, just picking up on that, Becky, maybe I can come back to you. One of the things that you mentioned as you were speaking, and might have been Sarah, actually, you used this phrase of actually the unique gifts that people of an older generation bring into not only the culture of a toddler group context. So many of the people with us today or watching on record will think, actually, yeah, somebody's just put in the chat, 60 is the new 40. But many of our teams are of our older generation. What would you say are some of those unique gifts as we look and value those who are with us, the volunteers who can give time midweek and so on? If you were to highlight some of those gifts, what
I think, I mean, not every person of grandparent generation has bags of time, but many people are retired or have more time. You know, time to meet up with somebody for coffee, time to chat. So time is one thing, but I think for me it's that life experience. You know, if you've walked with Jesus, and many of your people will have walked with Jesus for maybe 70 years. I mean, you know, you're talking a very, very long time. What have they learned? And, you know, I touched on it before about, you know, the problems. As a young mum, I thought every problem was new to me. Of course, it wasn't new to me. Every generation's been through the baby that won't sleep, the questioning, the roll up, you know, all that stuff, you know, that you negotiate for the first time, somebody else has negotiated before you. And I also think there's a lot to do with being non-threatening in a sense. You know, I think my experience is, I know a fair number of people who've come back to faith or to faith with their first child, either through a toddler group or through baptismal dedication or something, because I think there's something that happens for many people with when the child is born, that they want everything that's good for that child. And that often includes a notion, like we call it an acorn of faith, that God is somehow involved in that. And so they may seek out a church-based group. And there's like this little window of curiosity. How does God fit in? Is this, you know, if I want everything good for my child, how is God part of that? And I think, you know, they don't come to be preached at, they're not coming to a Sunday service, but they're coming to a community of faith, and that's where they begin to discover God. And I think when I first ran my first toddler group, I hoped that they would kind of get God by osmosis. You know, I thought, you know, we're going to love them lots, and actually what I've learned is that we need to do the little revealing God bits and be a little bit more explicit, and actually to say, we have really good stuff for you. And I think the older generation can do that really well just by talking about their lives and offering to pray and remembering that conversation you had, and how can we, you know, is there anything else we can do? You know, I just think a toddler group without an older generation volunteer is lacking something, to be honest.
And can I just highlight specifically granddads and granddad figures? Because often when I spoke to people in the research, granddads sort of didn't even comprehend that they could have a part to play. And for various reasons, perhaps generationally or various things, that often the granddads I've spoken to were less involved with the children than their mother was. And so then it just is presumed, oh, well, grandma will do more. But actually, Granddads have so many valuable things, you know, and so much of what Becky said particularly. And so again, in our toddler groups, how can we kind of big them up and really encourage them, I think, to be involved as volunteers, but also in kind of their children's lives.
So just picking up on that, I think it's really valuable, isn't it? Because as we look around our toddler group context, dare I say, there are predominantly women, amazing women, and some brilliant men, many of whom are part of this network and some here today. How can we do more in that area to actually really affirm in the granddad figure, like you said, amongst some of the men to come forward who may not historically have seen the toddler group space as being where they feel most welcome or most at home, but absolutely, like you said, the powerful presence, the story sharing, that input. What are some really practical ways that as group leaders might look around and say, you know, yes, you know, I'm with you on that, we'd really love that, but how do we get them to come along? What does that look like for us to encourage people to come?
I think the biggest thing I'd say is what we talk about, and although we might perhaps feel this and agree with this, do we actually specifically say it? And particularly from the front, perhaps if, you know, who's talking about the toddler group in church? Is it always, you know, a female, or is there a bloke who could do it, even if that's, you know, someone who's not necessarily explicitly involved? But how can we put those messages out there that show that value and very explicitly tell stories, you know, of not saying, oh yes, blokes can do it because here's a story, but actually just mentioning stories and deliberately making sure that we're including stories about granddads and granddad figures. Yeah.
Brilliant.
I think my experience sometimes with trying to involve gentlemen in this, you know, you may need to give them a role they feel comfortable with. You know, it is a bit of a weird space, I think, for maybe a man to come into and just, how am I going to talk to people? Because there's lots of, how can I talk to these young mums sort of thing. But, you know, if they're maybe the person who puts the chairs out or arranges the room, can you just get them to stay and hang on? Or maybe they're the one who builds the massive train track that's going to spill across half the room, or invite them in for a specific activity. You know, maybe that they're an expert on, we're going to do something about birds this week, and this is Bill who is, you know, going to talk about, we're going to make bird feeders or something, you know, to find roles where they feel comfortable so they don't just stand around feeling rather out of place. And you may also find we've got a lady in our church who's quite good at making her husband come to things, and he's quite used to, you know, if you can, with some people you may be able to give a specific invitation, we'd really like your presence, because maybe you've got some dads coming with children and it would be nice for them to have somebody to talk to as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, it's obviously sparked some, we've got some great ideas in the chat. Thank you to all of you who've put that put some comments in there about absolutely, that idea of having a particular opportunity, activity, function. We've got men who are part of our toddler group existingly, who are, you know, not just serving in the kitchen, serving coffee, but actually leading on activities. Our friend Tim, you've spoken in these webinars before. Thank you for chipping in. Tim has said we advertise the Who Let the Dads Out group as well. And I'm sure there's a dotted line there, isn't it? From the Who Let the Dads Out to dads coming into a toddler group context. Somebody's asked, what's that? Who Let the Dads Out, Tim? Maybe you could put a bit more information in the chat, because that's an amazing opportunity as well, isn't it? To say to those who come to our existing toddler groups, where there are these Who Let the Dads Out national initiatives, but also locally, it's a real place for dads and again, grandparenting, granddad figures alongside the men as well as the wider families there as well. So yeah, it's just a good trigger for us, isn't it, to be thinking, how do we represent, again, you know, both older women in our context,